This is not sounding very professional, but that's okay.
Being in a high state of arousal is energy costly. Can I look at the camera? Panting. You need to let your ability to nose breathe dictate the pace. If I can say one thing to you all, it's
scroll down and hit the subscribe button. We've all been there, staring down a massive set of doubles, the sketchy drop, or some insanely steep trail. And we want to ride that thing. Even though it's certainly beyond our comfort zone, it's not necessarily a huge step beyond our ability. And perhaps there's a cute girl standing right next to it. We all know it's easier to ask for a phone number if we're not presently bleeding. But between the thoughts of landing wrong, of stuffing the front wheel into backside, and instantly meeting that deductible, we do get hit with overwhelming fear. We also know that if we don't push past our own limits just a little bit, we'll never get better, just bored. And that drop just looks like so much fun. So the $1 million skill, how do we safely overcome this fear? As a former professional mountain biker, I would say the worst thing to do is to ride while scared. It's important to acknowledge fear, but letting it control the ship is a one-way ticket to a mayday. In just the last week alone, I've had to get myself through new to me features that, quite honestly, the consequences of not successfully doing absolutely scared me. I have my own techniques, but I recently got to spend some time with Griffin Coombs, a breath science practitioner who teaches people to use their bodies to manage stress and boost performance. My girlfriend and I had the privilege of taking Griffin on his first ever mountain bike ride. Yes, first ever. And he did great. Griffin was doing some cool stuff to manage his adrenaline during the ride. And the result? Well, he not only rode great, but he looked way better than just about any other first-time rider. How was the ride, Griffin?
The ride was scary at first. That's for sure. But throughout the ride, I got a little bit more comfortable. And once I started to feel what it was like to ride over rocks and roots, which I'd never done before as somebody who only rode on the road or on pavement, once I started to feel what that was like, I could kind of calibrate to that a little bit more. And then it started to become really fun. I started to loosen up and I, dare I say, even accessed a bit of flow state.
I saw you sliding through a few corners and not freaking out.
Yeah.
And I saw you almost crash once and jump off and do a little cyclocross run and jump back on.
Yep.
If you were scared, I think you might have panicked and grabbed the brakes real hard and fully...
Yeah, and I definitely had moments where I noticed tension and I noticed that I was getting a little bit stiff and a little bit, not panicky, but approaching that kind of overwhelming fear state. And so, I had a lot of techniques to kind of use my body to get back into control, to get back into a little bit more looseness. And then, that allowed me to bail that time and still land on my feet and be safe about it and get right back on and not let that experience carry over into the rest of my ride where it made me more scared. So, yeah. Well,
I noticed that. And I think this is it's awesome to ask you some questions about how you achieve that. So I've got three decades of practice, not only of breaking bones and crashing, but getting over fear while riding. I usually look at a new feature and assess if my abilities are enough to do it. And if they are, then I have two main techniques that I use. I think you've got more to add to the table, so I'm stoked to have you here. Before I ask you the important questions, I got to share what I do so everyone knows. This is kind of an unusual mix of podcast and video, so I will admit that to the audience right away. I kind of think to myself, don't think, just do. And I take myself out of anything other than just doing the thing. And then the next step, I visualize in my mind doing it. So I picture myself going off that takeoff, pumping in the air and nosing into the landing and it all going smooth. And once I've then visualized it and stopped thinking, I then go and do it without any more further thinking. So how can I do better than that?
Well, you got a great start, I think, and visualization is a tool that a lot of successful people use. I would add to it that as much as the mind influences the body also influences the mind. In fact, perhaps even more so than the other way around. So if we can teach the body to tell the brain that we're safe and we're confident, and then couple that with your visualization and the getting out of the thought patterns, then you've got a recipe for confidence, for safety, and readiness that kind of approaches it from both angles.
And not having to call Mayday. If you're enjoying this video, I've done over 50 riding tutorials over the years, but you won't find them posted here on YouTube. Instead, they're only posted over on my Patreon page. Yes, my Patreon page is more than just a digital tip jar. There's a wide variety of topics posted up between body positioning, how to effectively use the brakes, how to do a wheelie, how to boost a jump, how to do a low speed drop. There's tons of tutorials up there, and it's not just me. I've also posted a whole bunch of coaching tutorials coaching other riders through some of these techniques. Scroll down to the YouTube description below and I've got a bunch of those Patreon videos linked to you down there, and pop on over. We're currently doing a free trial promo so you can get a look and see if it's something you want to check out. Thank you all so much for your support. It means a lot to me that we can be here talking bikes and having so much fun. All right, let's get back into the video. You kind of considered this 3 different sections, and I think that's spot on. So what we'll call the before. Say we're at a single feature, we're going to the dirt jumps, we're out on a ride, and we've arrived at, say, a skills park or maybe some big sketchy rock roll. How can we use some breath work to help control our anxiety of seeing this looming, terrifying feature?
Yeah. Well, we have to understand that the rate of your breathing, how fast or slow you're breathing, is directly related to the state of your nervous system. So even when we're just anticipating something that's scary, before we even do it, the breathing rate will tend to start to increase and the nervous system goes into more of a survival state. This is okay in a certain amount because we don't want to be completely relaxed, but too much of it can cause us to lose focus and lose control and maybe even start to panic. So to avoid that, we can kind of intercept this survival mode with slowing our breathing consciously. And so that starts to send a signal from the body to the brain that we're a little bit more relaxed, and it can keep us a little bit more focused and just avoid getting too panicky or too anxious.
So we can trick ourselves into being confident by slowing our breathing.
If you want to put it that way, yeah.
I mean, that sounds simple, but like, how do I, this is a 40-foot roll in, I'm going to die. How do I all of a sudden slow my breathing down?
There are certain levels of danger or levels of stress. So slowing your breathing and just telling yourself, okay, I'm going to breathe slower than normal can work for a lot of things. So you might choose just a rate that feels really good for you, but is just slower than you were breathing before. So you could count if you want, or you could just kind of be intuitive about it. There's sort of a trapdoor emergency technique that I like to use if things are really, really stressful. And that's just to stop your breathing for a really short amount of time. So no more than 5 seconds, typically after an exhale. And if you just exhale normally, pinch your nose and wait for 5 seconds, and then continue breathing normally, that can start to sort of boost that calming down response. Because if the mind is racing so much, it can be really difficult to make ourselves slow the breathing.
Sure.
So sometimes we just need like a pattern interrupt where it's just like, stop. And then that kind of brings us down enough to then be able to take control of our breathing a little bit more.
And you say through counting, what should we count to and how much should we breathe while counting?
That's another great question, and that's going to vary between everybody. Ballpark is about 4.5 to 6.5 breaths per minute. So that could be around 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out can feel good. And if that feels not quite right for you, because everyone's different, then you can experiment with, 4 in, 6 out, or 3 in, 6 out. Just around there, that's going to be slower than your normal breathing rate.
So take 1 breath while counting to 4, and then exhale while counting to 5.
You could start there, absolutely.
Okay. I don't know. Sounds like an easy way to. Here's a roadmap, everyone.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. There's your roadmap, and like I said, you without knowing the exact breathing rate that's going to be right for you, you want to be really intuitive about it. So starting with counting is great, but after a while, you're just going to feel what rate just feels more relaxing for you.
And it's kind of like being intentional about this, taking it into awareness will help a ton to make some progress.
Absolutely.
So, one thing that someone told me about was box breathing, and it's a technique I used a long time ago when I was racing. I always do it before the start of a race. I don't know, someone else mentioned it way back when. And then I've recently done that before trying some like new lines and stuff while we're filming, and it did help me be much more focused. So should I tell everyone to go do box breathing right here, right now?
Great question. The short answer is no.
Okay.
So box breathing is, and for those who don't know, box breathing is when you do equal lengths. Inhale, hold at the top, exhale, hold at the bottom. For some people, that can feel really focusing and calming and relaxing. For other people, that breath holding piece can feel really stressful. So again, this all comes down to the individual. I don't really recommend any extended breath holding to anybody unless I've assessed them and gotten to know their background a little bit. So if you've done box breathing and you've felt that it helps you and it doesn't stress you out, go for it. But if you're just starting out and you don't know your tolerance to that kind of feeling of suffocation from holding your breath, the baseline recommendation I would give is just slow breathing in and out and skip the breath holds.
Cool. And then coupling that with the whole, like, I can picture myself hitting this takeoff. I go down that hill, everyone else goes down. And then, okay, I'm not going to think, I'm just going to do it. Then we got all 3 things coming together. The mind and the body connect.
Exactly.
And if you can follow someone else through, it makes it way easier. But
Yeah.
if you can't, then hey, we'll take the straws that we can find.
Yes.
So the next topic, during. So on your first ever ride with us, you mentioned managing your adrenaline. And I thought that was a really interesting topic. I definitely have to deal with that when I'm riding a place like Whistler Bike Park, and I'm just constantly afraid of breaking my leg in Canada and having to deal with all that. So yeah, do you have any advice on how we can better manage our adrenaline over the general course of a ride?
Sure. With all of this using our body or our physiology to kind of regulate our emotional state, really has to do with the signaling that what we're doing with our body is sending to our brain. So are we telling our brain that we're safe, or are we telling our brain that we should be stressed? So we just talked about breathing as one of those conscious ways to control that. Another thing is the tension that you hold in your body, because when we're feeling dysregulated or unsafe, we tend to hold more tension in our body, particularly in the extremities, the hands and the feet, places that are closer, that touch the outside world. So we brace with those parts of our body out of fear of the unknown. And so one way, again, you can kind of interrupt that pattern and tell the brain, hey, you don't have to be so panicky, is to consciously scan for those tensions in your body. You can do this while you're riding. I was doing it yesterday.
Sure.
And just noticing, whoa, I'm gripping my handlebars way more than I need to. And that, just the awareness alone allows you to kind of release that as much as you need to and start to send signals of safety and lets you ride a little bit more fluidly.
Should we utilize some breath work while riding to help ensure that we relax everywhere else in the body?
Yeah, you could. I would say there's a lot more to think about while you're riding.
Yeah.
And I think the intention of a lot of this breathwork training, especially the way that I do it, is so that you don't have to think as much about it while you're doing the thing. So while you're performing, I don't really recommend trying to control your breathing too much. But bringing awareness to the breathing can just help it kind of automatically regulate, or at least more so, without having to try and manipulate it too much. And that goes the same with the tensions in your body.
And the tensions in the body, that's a real thing. Everyone thinks like gripping the handlebar is death grip. But like it's also, you can hold on way too tightly with your feet, especially if you have clip-in pedals and you'll all of a sudden unclip, not be expecting it. But also your body position on the bike. I keep telling you and also Savannah and other folks to get low on the bike, keep bent knees. And that's for several reasons. One, it generally keeps people more pliable with the bike and more relaxed. Because if you are nervous and clenched, it might not just be your hands. It could be your entire core is clenched, and then you can't absorb impacts and you can't flow through obstacles. So
Riding better, right?
Yeah.
Like you just said.
yeah, so that's like the middle of the ride, but it's also a general thing that we can use all the time. And then we call this after, but it's also during a ride. So one thing I had to deal with when racing a lot is I'd be sprinting down a hill, pedaling out of every single corner, and then I'd get to a short climb, and I'd already be totally out of breath and gassed from all this sprinting. And when you are pumping and smashing down a hill, you can, on accident, hold your breath and end up even more out of breath. So how do you get that quick recovery to then have more matches to burn on the next uphill sprint?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is a huge part of just breathing for any type of athletic performance, no matter what you do. So the research suggests that the speed of the breath is more related to the state of your nervous system, and the depth of your breath is more related to the demands of your physical activity. And so obviously, if you've just sprinted, you have to breathe more. That's just normal.
Yeah.
But how you breathe more could be the difference in your recovery. So a lot of people will default to, okay, I've just sprinted, I'm out of breath, so I'm panting and taking these shallow breaths through their mouth. But you could get the same amount of air if you just took bigger breaths but made them slower. Now, maybe it won't be that slow if you've just sprinted, but the idea is that decrease the speed but increase the size. And so you're giving the body the air that it needs while also avoiding overblowing the survival response from all that fast breathing.
So bigger inhales, bigger exhales,
Yep.
rather than more.
Exactly.
Cool. And then one thing you make mention of earlier that I'm curious about more is the physiological sigh. How does that, is that what you just described, or is that something different?
It's similar. It's a technique. I believe the term was coined by Andrew Huberman, but it's basically just 2 inhales and then an exhale. So you would take a pretty full inhale through the nose, and then you would just suck in a little bit more air through the nose at the top. And the key is a long extended exhale through the mouth. And you're going to want to purse the lips to allow the air not to escape so fast. So the pursed lips just let the exhale be a little bit longer. So it's
Can you give us an example?
Sure. So you would take a full breath, bit more. Now, again, if you just sprinted, that is probably going to be a lot faster. But the idea is that extended exhale over time is going to lower the state of the nervous system gradually until you feel like you can kind of regain control of a normal breathing pattern. So you might do it as many times as you need to, or as many times as you can before you have to go into the next interval.
Yeah, to the next sprint.
Yeah.
I was terrible at bringing down my breathing. I was always like pegged. Yeah. But I was also a terrible climber or anything that involved physical exertion. So maybe it's not just the breathing, but
it could be. I mean, I think breathing is a missing piece that a lot of people don't consider. And I was one of them where my conditioning, when I used to be a martial artist and do high intensity stuff, and I gassed out like instantly all the time. And I know now that it was the breathing that was causing me to gas out. So if you're somebody who feels like you don't have great conditioning, or your cardio is not great, you could consider the way that you're breathing as a way to improve conditioning, because often it goes that way.
Is the physiological sigh something we should do while sprinting in a 5-minute, basically tempo, pedaling as fast as you can for 5-minute type effort?
No, I would say the physiological sigh is for recovery.
Okay.
So for while you're working, we use something called the gearing system that comes originally from Brian McKenzie at Shift Adapt. And so the gears, I use a 4-gear system, which is easy nose breathing. Gear 2 would be power nose breathing. Gear 3 would be in through the nose, out through the mouth. And gear 4 would be mouth breathing. And those kind of correlate with the energy systems that you're using. So if you're going full on sprint, you're going to be mouth breathing. Mm-hmm. But it's almost like, can you extend your gears? Can you train so that you can stay in gear 1 or gear 2 a little bit longer before you need to shift into opening your mouth? And that over time will improve your tolerance to the stress of the exercise and also improve your endurance.
How do we do that?
Yeah. So I would dedicate, if you're a rider or a runner or anything, I would dedicate at least 1 workout a week to nasal breathing only.
Oh, wow.
So, and the key here where so many people get lost is you have to slow down, because it's going to be harder at first. So you need to let your ability to nose breathe dictate the pace of your ride rather than the other way around, letting your pace dictate your breathing. So if you want to train your capacity to be able to breathe through the nose, you have to recognize when your body's craving to open your mouth.
Yeah.
And if you can't sustain that, you got to slow down so you can stay breathing through the nose. And over time, that capacity gets larger. Cool.
I need to do that. A lot of mountain bikers, I don't think actually train. They just ride because it's so much fun to smash down hills and hit sick jumps and all that. But man, if you go to the gym, go running, do yoga, all the things, it helps so much more than any fancy shock or bike part. So it's easier to click on a video about bike parts than it is to click on one about how to get personally better.
Yeah, that's true.
So once we do pull off something that was scary and did have an adrenaline hit and all that, do you have any cool techniques to manage that? Because if we have adrenaline coming up, we're going to have a crash later on. So how do we maintain a more neutral thing after something super exciting?
Yes, excellent question. And this is something that a lot of people neglect. Can I look at the camera?
Sure, I don't care. If you're talking directly to whoever, yeah, that's fine.
If I can say one thing to you all, it's don't skip your recovery breathing. So recovery breathing is this. Once you understand the principles, it doesn't have to be very complicated. What we're trying to do is we just did something that's really high intensity. The nervous system is jacked up, and now we want to bring it back to a state of balance to, number 1, kickstart the recovery process, and number 2, to make sure that we don't bring that survival mode arousal into the rest of our lives and make it into a habit and kind of be stuck there. So again, it's slowing your breathing and it's body awareness. So take, and as little as 3 minutes, I recommend 5 minutes, lie down or sit down, just get really comfortable after your ride or after your event. And just, again, that same thing you did at the beginning, it's almost coming full circle. Slow the breathing in and out through the nose. And if you want to add a little bit of extra down regulation, meaning just bring you more into relaxation, you can hum on those exhales. And so vibrating the vocal cords just helps to sort of encourage that relaxation response even more.
So to make it more specific, I can think of many people who will have a fantastic day pulling off a whole bunch of new first-time rock rolls or jumps or whatever, and then they have the biggest crash of their life after doing fantastic. And I think it's because they had their adrenaline so pegged all day, it started to come down, and then they got more tired, more lazy, more lethargic than they ever expected because they had all these high adrenaline successes. Is there a good way mid-ride to bring down the adrenaline so that that doesn't happen?
That's a good question. You could use any of the techniques that we've discussed, and it comes down to experimentation, because the ability to detect what's going on in your body and to understand what feels good for you, to understand what state you're in, that in and of itself is basically the same as being able to manage your state. So meaning if you've experimented with a few things and you know what it feels like in your body to be more relaxed and focused versus what it feels like when you're approaching like too much survival mode, too much arousal, then you can decide which tools are going to bring you where you want to go. So while you're riding, you can try slowing your breathing. You can try a couple of physiological sighs. You can try humming on your exhales. You can try bringing awareness to the body scan and releasing tensions, or any combination of those. And once you understand what those states feel like, you will know when you're brought back into a state of focus rather than over adrenalized, because like you kind of said, it's almost like if you're too adrenalized and you don't know how to come back, it's like you're just stepping on the gas when you don't need to, and you're just wasting your gas tank, because being in a high state of arousal is energy costly. And so, one way to do that is exactly that, is use any of these techniques to just bring yourself back when you don't need to be adrenalized.
Cool. I need to practice some of those more.
We all do, everywhere.
But the bike parts are kind of cool because you're sitting on a chairlift. You have a moment to do that. Or if you're out on a pedaling ride, you can utilize the climb to calm yourself a little bit. I find climbing very helpful. How do people find you? I know it's thenorthstarbody.com.
Yep.
Then you've got a podcast with Savannah. What's that?
Yeah. So Savannah and I are restarting our podcast called Forging Fluidity. And it's more just exploring purpose, self-development. A lot of things are related to the stuff that I teach and the stuff that she coaches, just around managing your body, managing your nervous system, your stress levels, but also going a lot more into the philosophy and just the human experience of living and navigating it all. So you could check that out. I'm on Instagram as the North Star Body. And there are other podcasts that you can find me on around movement and nervous system regulation also. Cool.
I'll have a link to the North Star Body down in the YouTube description below. You guys can pop over there and check out Griffin's work. And I wrote up a little conclusion I should probably read. So I'll do that, and then we'll sign off. This is not sounding very professional, but that's okay. Many of the actual riding techniques I use, like riding up to a jump a few times, maybe riding the lower portion of a rock roll before building up to the top, or just following someone else through something, these are all tying into my mental strategies, but combining this with breath work is absolutely free. It's not gonna hurt, and it'll form a complete mind-body connection. Everyone's different, so it's absolutely worth it to try these techniques. It's kind of steep. Griffin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And maybe we can remind everybody that if they like this, they can scroll down and hit the subscribe button. Okay. All right, thank you. Let's go give you your second mountain bike ride.
Cool.
And I'll bring a GoPro this time.